大家好，欢迎大家来到波士顿清华校友会的 TAP Talk。本次是我们的第148期，我们邀请到了引知教育麻省理工前招生官 DJ Rock 为大家全面解读美国大学最新趋势与动态，深度剖析招生官眼中的升学要点。那在讲座开始之前呢，首先为大家介绍我们 TAP Talks 的系列活动。TAP Talks 是一个由清华校友主办，以分享有价值思想、行业科普洞察或多元人生体验为目的而发起的系列主题交流会，旨在营造一个属于大家一起学习、成长和娱乐的社区氛围。我们相信每个人背后的故事和敏锐的思想都值得被传播和聆听。TAP Talks 系列讲座权责声明一：嘉宾言论和行为不代表波士顿清华校友会的观点和立场。二、讲座音频、视频、文字等资料版权归波士顿清华校友会所有，未经许可，任何个人、媒体不得编辑和传播。那在讲座正式开始之前呢，我来为大家再次正式的介绍引知教育。引知创立于耶鲁大学，目前在全球多个国家和地区开展业务，是全球领先的升学规划与申请咨询机构。引知的核心理念源于一个简单但重要的发现：最直接、最真实的招生知识来源于曾经亲自参与招生决策的前招生官。那本期嘉宾呢，由来自引知教育的麻省理工前招生官为大家解读美国大学申请趋势与动态，以及最新成功的学生案例解析和独家宝贵经验。接下来，我们就把时间交给嘉宾。那在正式交给嘉宾之前呢，我在我们的问卷测验里为大家发送了一个投票，请大家参与一下这个投票。然后接下来我们就有请 Joy 李为大家开始分享。
谢谢雨涵，稍等一下，我分享一下我的屏幕。
好的。
应该大家可以看得到我的屏幕，对吧？
嗯，可以的。
好，谢谢。那么今天非常感谢大家参与今天的讲座。然后呢，我接下来的介绍呢会切换为英文，但是呢，因为我也可以讲中文，如果大家有任何问题，希望通过中文发送，然后可以随时通过 chat box 把您的问题分享到这个我们的这个讲座当中，然后我们在结尾会有一个 Q&A section，然后我们的主讲人 DJ 会帮忙去解答您的问题。然后接下来呢，我会切换为英文。Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. Does applying early help your chances? A guide to EDEA and REA. We hope today's session will help families gain a better understanding of how students can prepare and position themselves for success throughout the whole application process. My name is Joy Lee, and I'm the Assistant Office Director for the Boston region at Ingenious Prep, and I'm the host for today's webinar. Now, just a few quick housekeeping notes before we officially get started. If you have any comments or questions during this presentation, please feel free to use the Q&A section or share your questions in the chat box. Unfortunately, we can't see when you use a raise hand feature, so try not to use it. So we will have a Q&A towards the end of our discussion. So if you have any questions, please let us know, and our speaker will answer them at the end. If you have the latest version of Zoom, you can turn on the closed captions and translation feature as well. Also, once the recording of this webinar is ready, we will email to you so that you can review any content if needed. Okay, so move on to some introductions. Um, so today we're honored to be joined by a wonderful speaker, DJ Rock, a MIT former admissions officer at Ingenious Prep. DJ, would you like to give everyone a brief introduction?
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to be on this call tonight. My name is DJ. I spent many years in the Boston area, attending Boston University for my undergrad, Northeastern for my grad school, working at MIT, really where I spent a lot of my formative years. So I'm really happy to be on the call tonight. I'm currently based in New York City. I've been at Ingenious Prep ever since I left MIT, so just happy to bring all these years of insights to tonight's session.
Thank you, DJ. So before we dive into today's main topic, there are a few stops on our roadmap that we'd like to cover first. So at Ingenious Prep, we believe our students' success is built on our counselors, resources, curriculum, and results. These are the foundation of everything we do and what sets our approach apart. So we have a team of over 160 formal admissions officers from top university all over the country. Our counselors have worked at schools like Harvard, Yale, MIT, etc. So these counselors create a personalized admission strategy for the student that they work with. Next, we have more than 175 graduate coaches who work with our formal admission officers on the 2-to-1 team to implement the student's admission strategy. And let's talk about our curriculum. Our curriculum is built based on insights from our formal admissions officers. We've taken their firsthand knowledge and insider perspectives and turned that into a structured, systematic approach that we use to train and guide our counseling team. Finally, let's talk about results. This past admission cycle was a very strong one for us. So our student received more than 200 Ivy League and top 10 offers, 377 top 20 offers, 562 top 30 offers, just to name a few. So on average, each student received 4.37 admission offers, demonstrating the strength and consistency of our personalized approach. And with that, we've come to the end of this overview, and now we will move into the main part of today's session. DJ, I will pass it over to you. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thanks so much for that introduction. And let's get started by talking a little bit about early action and early decision. So first, we can go ahead and define kind of what these things are. So early action is a non-binding admissions process where students can apply earlier than the regular deadline. Typically, that deadline is November 1st. And with early action, I like to say you apply early and you find out early, but you don't have the pressure of necessarily making the decision, right? You can often apply to other schools after you find out and decide where you want to go. Early decision is similar in that you apply early, typically around November 1, and you get in early. However, you're telling the schools that have early decision, if you accept me, I am willing to withdraw my applications from every other college that I applied to, and I 100% will commit to your school, and you're required to attend. Early decision 2 is the same as early decision 1, but you get a little bit more time and you can do it typically around December 1st, so a little bit later in the fall. So again, all of these cycles you can apply early and find out early. Early decision means that you've decided early. That's the school you want to go to. Early action just means you're acting early, right? You want to get that result, but you don't necessarily have to go. That's the big difference. And then within early action, there's even more. So there's restrictive early action, which is a non-binding process, right? So same as before. The difference is that they can't apply to any early decision school, but can apply to other early action schools. So some schools say, if you apply to us early, you just can't tell other schools that you would 100% commit to them at the same time, right? So you would only be able to apply to other early action only schools. And then single choice early action means that you can't apply to other early or early decision schools. So again, early action means you're acting early. You don't have to decide early, but it does mean that you could only apply early to that particular school. And then regular decision is probably the one that we're all familiar with, where you apply by January 1st, you find out in the spring of senior or grade 12. Um, and that's kind of like the typical timeline that we're all familiar with. And here's an example of just different schools and the policies that they have. So Princeton has that single choice early action policy that we mentioned. Harvard has that restrictive early action. MIT, where I worked, had a traditional early action pool. And you can see some other institutions that have early decision. And you can see kind of amongst the top schools that there's a variety, right? Some of the top schools are binding, some are not. You can see similar schools that have different policies and plans. So it really is just like a school by school, kind of knowing which school and what policy they have. So let's kind of keeping that in mind, right? I'm going to use those terms quite a bit in the next few slides. Let's look at what happened with the data from our class last year around these particular points of early. So increased deferrals, what we see is that schools are continuing to be cautious because they don't want to admit too many students in the early rounds, not knowing who may be in the regular rounds. So we see a lot of schools that will defer, meaning they don't say yes, they don't say no. They say, thanks for applying early. We're going to put you in the regular pool with everyone else who applies regular. We've also seen sustained competitiveness. Overall, at all of these schools, it's hyper ultra competitive. It's super tough to get in, single digit admission rates. It's really, really tough. And we do see some variations across institutions. I think there are some school to school trends that show variations rather than something you can say is true for all US colleges. And we'll give some specific examples of that as we continue. So one, there are some shifts in application volume, and kind of here is our analysis, right? One is the testing trap. So there are schools like Brown and Yale which return to mandatory SAT or ACT requirements, and they saw drops in the applicant pool. Namely, I think what happened was students who said, I'm not great at the SAT or I don't have a good score. When it wasn't required, they said, I'll apply to Yale or Brown anyway, because maybe I'll get in based off my good grades and extracurriculars. I think now students who don't have the scores that are in range are just opting not to apply, right? They're saying, I know that I don't have the SAT scores for Yale. I have to submit them. I'm not going to write all of the essays to apply to Yale. I'm just going to kind of take myself out of the pool now. And so the total application volume is up 9%, but it's growing faster than unique applicants at these types of schools. We also see diversity growth. So a lot of these schools have been making efforts to reach underrepresented students like first generation and minority applicants. And so those growth rates are a little bit higher, right? And we see that international interest, particularly from Africa and Asia, is down, potentially due to visa, economic, or testing factors, right? Maybe it's the required test scores that have that reading section that's tough for folks, or maybe it's just politically there's a lot going on. So students are making different choices. What I would say, however, I think is sometimes misleading about this is that while overall across US schools, right, there are less international students applying. I think that's something you may have heard in the news or people are saying. What we do see is that more international applicants are applying to top 20 colleges. Those schools actually have an increase in the number of international applicants. So I think in general, international applicants as a trend are saying, going to college in the US may not be worth it, but I'll only go if I get into Harvard or Princeton or Yale. So they're only applying to those schools. So even though the overall numbers are down, it doesn't mean that it's easier now to get into Harvard or MIT, right? I think the competition is still quite selective. So we see a few things. One, we do see that in general, colleges are either significantly opening up to, or in the opposite, limiting the number of international students admitted. It's either swinging one way or the other. For example, Emory and NYU continue to be favorable towards international students, particularly those from China, where schools like Johns Hopkins and Vanderbilt saw noticeable drops in the number of Chinese students that they admitted. And I think there could be a number of reasons for that, but in general, I think that because visa delays and different things maybe are making more students less likely to enroll, they're trying to kind of solidify the numbers for their class. So that's why you see some of those trends. And really, again, it's hard to make a blanket statement when it comes to this particular fact because it really does feel school by school. And I mean, this gets even more specific, right? We look at Yale, where they rejected a significantly higher number of applicants compared to previous years, indicating a strategic change, right? Maybe they're making their classes smaller, or maybe they're saying, we want to opt for the wait list more, right? We want to see what our class looks like and then have more of a say in hand picking who's actually in the class. We look at U Michigan, right? The college basically did not utilize the newly opened early decision option in its first year. So it just did early decision. We were like, what's going to happen? And they didn't admit a lot of students, right? And that was information. And then the MIT yield prediction. MIT deferred more students into the regular decision round than in previous years, including students with top Olympiad competition wins, which we think is a strategy for yield protection since their early action policy is non-restrictive. In other words, right, because they know that students that are applying early action and get in may then also apply to Harvard and Princeton and Yale and have the ability to do so, they're saying, well, why don't we defer and have more options for ourselves in the springtime? So again, here are some specific examples, but we're tracking across all the schools so that we can best support our students and give them specific strategies based on their individual lists. So, what we've seen, despite all of this, is that there are a few things that have made applicants really successful. One is students who perform better demonstrated clearer thinking on their goals, right? So the students that were admitted to top schools, I think were able to say more than I like computer science because I like to code and play video games, and so I want to enter computer science, right? We're seeing that they're saying, I specifically love AI and machine learning, and I want to be the next AI developer that's going to create a system to optimize the way we exchange currency across countries, right? They're very clear and defined. They have clear and compelling stories, right? The narrative is there. This doesn't mean that their story is dramatic, right? It doesn't mean that they solved cancer or flew a rocket to the moon, but it means that they're saying, here's the narrative of my research. Here's the story I'm telling of how all of my experiences connect together so that I can make your job as an admissions officer easier when that's what you're trying to do in the process. And lastly, they used a real voice. There is so much talk about AI in essays. Not only is it obvious to tell, but I think the type of critical thinking and reflection that is doing really well in these essays, I think is something that can't be mirrored. And so students who are able to make a really compelling case as to why they should be admitted, why they are the leader or whatever quality it is about themselves that they're trying to share, those students are doing a little bit better in the process. Okay, so with that in mind, sometimes the question is like, well, what are they looking for, right? We've looked at the data, we've looked at the trends. How specifically do we get in? And we'll talk through some tips and tricks. So, at top universities, generally, admissions officers are all looking for the same thing, right? Top scores with a rigorous course load. I think there's a misconception that admissions officers say, well, this student got a 1570 and this one got a 1560, so admit this one, right? I think what they're looking for is, do you handle the academic requirements of our institution? For most schools, that's a pretty good SAT or ACT score, not necessarily perfect, but pretty high, and then getting a lot of A's in classes that are advanced and align with your academic interest. I worked at MIT where a lot of the applicants were interested in STEM, and so the hope was that they were taking things like AP or IB, maths and calculus and physics and doing really well in those subjects. They're also looking for impressive activities and honors lists. I always remind folks that when applying to US colleges, they're not simply looking for who are the best students. They're looking for people to be community members. So are you going to engage with your peers? Are you going to join clubs on campus? Are you going to be a good roommate in the dorms? And I think they use your activities and honors lists to gauge some of that. Compelling and well-written application essays. I think that one makes sense. And unique profiles that stand out. And we'll talk more about how to do that in a moment. Most universities use the process of holistic review, which means they view every single page of your application. Now, if I saw a student with SAT scores that were completely below the line, I would maybe skim the essays a little bit faster, right? And I'd be looking to say, is there any reason why the scores are low? Do we know if more scores are coming in, etc.? But I would still holistically review the application, even if it was the scores are too low for us, right? And that also means that there is not a checkbox, right? There is not a system that says 5 points for activities list, 5 points for honors, right? What they're doing is they're saying, who are you, right? Looking at all these different lenses and pieces together, they're trying to create a holistic review of you as an applicant. And here's how colleges describe it themselves. So Stanford says we review applications holistically, focusing on academic excellence, intellectual vitality, and personal context. Harvard says we seek to identify students who will be the best educators of one another and their professors, individuals who will inspire those around them during their college years and beyond. USC says we look for students who possess the potential to contribute to our diverse and vibrant campus life, who represent a vast array of interests and passions, and leaders unafraid to speak up in class or fight for a cause. Emory says we are looking to challenge one another to be the best that we can be, and we are looking for students who will make a positive contribution to this dynamic community. I think they're all kind of saying the same thing in different ways, right? Which is that you want students who are great thinkers, good at school, but also good community members, and they're looking at all of those pieces together. So I think the takeaway from all of this is that their admissions officers are looking for engaged, interesting human beings who will positively contribute to the school inside and outside of the classroom for years to come. At the most competitive schools, admissions officers are looking for students who will change the world. Cool. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how applications are processed, because I think knowing the process is so key. Yeah, to succeeding in it, right? And strategizing about how you're going to succeed within it. So when you submit your application, it's put into the general pool of thousands of applications. These images are funny to me because everything is digital now. But back in the day, it really was paper applications and folders for individual students. Then you separate those into regions based on geography, and typically each admissions officer gets a pile of applications. So let's say it's for, there's one admissions officer who's reading all the applications for Massachusetts, right? They're going to say, okay, it's my job to go through every Massachusetts applicant, and then go from there. Once they have their pile, they're going to select a handful that they want to accept, right? So I'm just going to use fake numbers, but let's say 100 students applied from Massachusetts. Maybe they say, okay, here's my top 15, right? Here are the 15 students I want to take forward to the final round of committee. And then at the end, all of the admissions officers meet and they bring their 15 or whatever number it is, right, from their regions. And then they make the class smaller from there, in that national pool. So the takeaway of that is you need to make an impression on the admissions officer assigned to your file, or they will not advocate for you, right? So your goal is, how do I make the Massachusetts person say, I really want to admit and advocate for this student in the final rounds of committee? Well, so let's talk a little bit about what should be completed around this time, for the application process itself. So one, I think it's important to narrow down your school list and decide on your early strategy. We just talked about how early is the way to go, right? Schools are getting more and more competitive, and early is a way to stand out and increase your admissions chances. And really what I tell my students right now is deciding on your early school sets the plan for all of your other applications. If you're applying to a school early decision and you know you can only apply to that one school, then you know that you're going to have to finish the whole application by November 1st. And then you have a lot of supplemental essays to write later on, and you'll make your plan accordingly, right? If you're applying to an early action school and it's not restrictive, and it means that you're going to apply to 4 early action schools, those are the applications you want to focus on now. So I think narrowing down your school list, figuring out where you want to apply early, because that's the first deadline, is going to be really important. And then you want to have a mix of reach, target, and safety schools, right? You want to have some schools where you say, I have a pretty good chance of getting in. You want to have some schools where you're like, I don't know, maybe I'll get in. And I always say, like, apply for those reach schools, right? A school like MIT is always a reach for every single student I've ever worked with, but students have got in, right? And so I think, having those dream schools is always really great. So let's say we have a student who sounds like a great student to me, right? 3.9 GPA, so nearly perfect, top 10% of their high school class, and a 1500 SAT score. Here's what I think things might look like for them. So I think we can skip the next two. Yeah. So for this student, I think their reach schools, right, would be schools like I mentioned, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, those like top 10 most selective colleges, right? They may also think of some highly selective liberal arts colleges like Amherst, Williams, Swarthmore, kind of the really, really, really selective small liberal arts schools. Some selective state universities, right, might also be considered a reach for the student, like the University of Michigan, UNC, UC Berkeley, and then some technical institutions like MIT, Caltech, and Carnegie Mellon, right? So in general, again, there's a lot of other information we would need, but this is what I would say would be like a reach for that student. And then we think about some target schools, right? Some well-ranked state universities like the University of Washington or the University of Wisconsin-Madison or the University of Illinois, UIUC, and then some respected liberal arts colleges like Oberlin, Vassar, or Haverford. So this is where I say, like, if you want more options in the springtime, more target schools are going to give you those choices, right? And that's often what I'm encouraging my students to think about. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see some of the safety schools. So maybe it's smaller state or regional colleges, right? So maybe not the largest flagship state school, but other state schools that are in your area, or liberal arts colleges with higher acceptance rates that could fall into this category. And you always just want to have a few, again, because the process changes every year. It is so volatile that I think having choices is always going to be really great. So now that we see kind of where you could go with that long, long list, I think then you have to start to narrow down and decide on your strategy. Which of the reach schools are you most excited for? Which school will you apply early? Always put your top choice perfect fit school as your early application because that's going to give you the greatest increase of your chances. So you really want to do that with your favorite school. And then if possible, right, plan to apply to at least one target or safety school during the early action. So that I just feel like it's a great motivator to have one acceptance in as you head through the rest of the process, which sometimes, you never know how it could shake out. Okay. So kind of continuing on our timeline. So again, around now, I think in addition to your list, you want to be editing and polishing your personal statement. Hopefully around this time, your personal statements are finalized or getting close to it. You're sharing your finalized draft with your friends, your family, counselors, and teachers for feedback. And you're aiming for the cleanest, most well-balanced, and compelling personal statement you can create. One that will make an impression of your story, and character on those who read it. And then also on your application, aside from your essay, the thing that will take the most amount of time is the honors and activities list. So finalizing your activities list and again, getting feedback from others and ensuring that the top activities align with your application persona and support your major interest, right? If you're applying for a biology program and you've done a few biology related extracurriculars, those should be the top of your activities list to again really say, that's my thing. I'm the biology person. I'm really great at it. I love it. I do it inside and out the classroom. You really want to kind of think about strategizing around your order of the activities list and kind of how you emphasize what things were more important for you. Okay. So up next, I think we had some FAQs or talking about early applications. And so, yeah, these are some questions that I often get doing this kind of work. So one, do I have a greater chance at acceptance if I apply early? And I think this next chart will really give us a great sense of showing you what that looks like, right? So while Harvard has a 3.63% percent acceptance rate, if you apply early, it goes up to 8.74%. Does that mean if you apply early, you're guaranteed to get into Harvard? No, 8.74 is still wild and very difficult to get into and a very small number. However, to me, that's a big statistical difference than 3.63%, right? You look at Columbia, where your chances are nearly tripled, right? At Yale, your chances are doubled. At Brown, nearly tripled, et cetera, for all these other schools. So again, for many schools, it just means that you have a slightly better chance of getting in because you've indicated that early interest. And we also look at acceptance rates over time. MIT in this past cycle, 0.06%, so not the most, is pretty kind of on par. But what we see for most other schools is that their acceptance rates continue to go down over time, right? And continue to get more and more selective, which just means fewer and fewer spots as we apply. And if we look at the total number of applicants as well, again, some variation. I think the lockdown period kind of shook things up over the past few years, but in general, you can see an increase in the number of applications overall through these schools. And again, more and more targeted. We're seeing more and more students with top SAT scores are the ones in the pool. So to answer the question, like, yes, if you can apply early, given all of these statistics, it will slightly increase your chances. And again, you'll be in a smaller applicant pool than the largest one. So definitely the goal. Awesome. So thinking again about kind of, or actually, let's skip the next couple of slides. And I think go to some more of the Q&A. I think that'd be helpful. So I think you can skip the next three. Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So what things should you consider before applying early action? One, right, is this your top school? And do you have strong fit for the school, right? So for example, a very easy one, MIT is a STEM focused school. If you do not love STEM, probably not the school you want to dedicate all of your time applying early to. But I think there are other things as well that go into that factor, right? Like, if you're someone who has multiple interests in different areas, maybe applying to a liberal arts school makes the most sense because they might like your profile versus a more technical school. It's really making sure that both you fit the school and the school fits you when you're applying early. I think the other big thing about early decision is that it is a binding agreement. So I think the question you have to ask yourself is, if I get into this school, am I okay with going and never knowing if I could have gotten into any other school that is out there? So I think there is a little bit of certainty that you need to have that says, if I get in, I'm going. And you need to have that certainty. So when possible, if you can do a tour of that school, be there on campus, just get any information before the process, I think that would be super helpful. Next, do international students have a higher possibility of getting accepted if they apply for EA or ED? Again, it's going to depend on the school itself, but in general, I would say yes. Applying early for all the reasons that we mentioned, right? More spots when you apply early, you're competing against more people for fewer spots when you apply regular. The disadvantages of applying early decision truly are just that you only get that bump for that one school. So I work with students who say, like, I just can't make a decision. I love all these schools, or I need, I really love Harvard, and Harvard doesn't have early decision. And if I apply early decision to another school, I would be at a loss if I never found out if I could have gotten into Harvard. Like for those students, I think that would be the disadvantage to early decision. But otherwise, again, I just think from the admissions lens, more than early action, because you can still apply to other schools, this gives you the most significant bump in the admissions process. Should regular decision applicants be submitted before the January 1st deadline to prevent other schools from assuming rejection from early action or restrictive early action schools, right? So basically, if I apply super early, are they going to be looking at the time that I submitted and knowing that I got denied from other schools and considering that? I think for the most selective colleges, they're really not looking at that level of depth. In fact, it's often like not obvious to see what time you submitted your application. They'd have to really dig and look into it. So I would say no. I think you should apply for your regular decision schools when the application is done. Try not to submit it right before the deadline in case your computer crashes or whatever, the Wi-Fi goes out. But in general, I think aiming for those early submissions is definitely the goal. And again, they're not going to be looking at that detail, and that's not the reason why you would get into the school or not. And lastly, what happens if I'm deferred or denied from my early decision school? In general, right, they'll either say no, or for most students, they will say, we deferred you to the regular application pool. So they're going to wait for everyone to apply in regular. And then typically what happens is your application is viewed just like the other regular applications. It enters the cycle just like them. You'll enter the same rounds of committee, right? You'll go back to the Massachusetts pool, for example, and they'll say, okay, who do I want to pick from the Massachusetts pool from this round? And then it may be you or not, right? But that's how it would work. So basically, you're just sitting and waiting for a little bit longer, which I know isn't fun, for them to give you a decision. The one thing that you do during this time period is you would send them an update about your grades so far in senior year and any notable achievements since when you applied. So you're working on that form that you'll send in January to say, here are my updates. Consider this when you view my application a second time. But other than that, you're just kind of waiting. Cool. So a lot of information. So I think sometimes examples are such a great way of kind of putting it all together. So we'll walk through a student case study just to get a sense of like, what does this look like in real life? So student B joined Ingenious Prep in grade 9, and we are using student B. We kind of wipe some information about them, so you can get a general sense of who of this story without knowing who it is. So at Ingenious, we have counselor teams that consist of a former admissions officer like myself, someone who's worked in one of these top schools. So the student had a former admissions officer from Dartmouth, a graduate coach, someone who attended one of these schools. So this student's graduate coach was currently getting a PhD at Brown, but had graduated from Cornell, and a family success manager, someone to make sure that the family was on board and that all of the plans were being communicated well. This person having graduated from the University of Toronto. So when the student came to us, we kind of look at their starting profile, and they had what I would call like a lot of nice things. They had a perfect 4.0 GPA. Their PSAT score was not the strongest, but it was relatively high. And I would predict with some testing and some prep, right? And this was also grade 9, that they'd probably reach a target score by the time they graduated. Um, extracurricular activities, the student did some hackathon, science fair, and chess club, and they were interested generally in STEM, engineering, and business. This is what a lot of students that come to me look like, right? I like STEM, I do some clubs at school, and I have good grades. But this alone, I think, is not enough to get into one of the top schools we mentioned, considering how competitive it is. And some specific feedback, right, is that yes, the student has strong academics, but I think the course choices need to show intentional progression, meaning they need to show this is the area I like and I'm getting better and better and taking deeper and deeper classes in it. I think they have broad exploration and nice activities, but there's no focus, there's no centralized theme. I think there's also not a lot of leadership. There's a lot of just doing things, right, being members of clubs, but not leading them. And the student has interest in the climate, in economics, and policy, which are all different things. And I think it's the broadness and vagueness of all of these things make them less memorable in the admissions process. They're less likely to stand out. And again, same with their activities, essays, recommenders, just everything feels kind of broad, right? Just I like STEM and I'm good at school. So through our candidacy building program, kind of the first thing we supported the student with was course selection alignment and academic signaling. So before, right, the course choices were driven by availability. So just like what was available, and there wasn't a lot of thought put into it. And there was a bunch of advanced courses in a variety of fields across STEM and humanities. So what we helped the student do was create clear, intentional academic signals. So we created a multi-year academic roadmap, kind of saying, okay, if we want to get to AP Physics C by grade 12, here's the prerequisites and the plan that we need in order to get there over the next several years. We recommended targeted honors in AP courses in things like calculus, chemistry, history, and economics. So it's centralized, right? I talked about the student liking business and engineering. Now we have courses that are aligned with that. And then we address the academic gap through an AP course and U Chicago's summer program and research. So kind of saying, I'm not just a student who likes engineering, but I have all of these academic experiences that have supported what it is that I'm good at. We added psychology to support interest in human-centered AI and align the student's academic track with interest in climate, policy, social impact, and AI. Then, when it comes from kind of getting their interests put together, we started with interest exploration. So, first, we identified some broad academic and career interests. We had some surveys, some interest mapping, and we had some brainstorming sessions. And so, what this looks like for me with a lot of my students is saying, like, have you ever looked at what the required classes of a computer science major are? That's a good place to look, right? To see if that's something you want to commit to for several years. So maybe I'll have them go on a different college's websites and look at the required courses. Maybe I'll have them look at crash course videos on YouTube or short little podcasts so they can start to explore what they might want to dig deeper into. And then that would progress into something like enrolling in an online course in a certain topic, kind of starting small with their interests and then developing it deeper and deeper as time goes on. I think from there, then we move to the development stage where they can take that topic they're interested in and do research in other programs. So for this student, they did an academic mentorship with us and they did research with Ingenious Prep. Again, they got into that competitive U Chicago summer program and they also participated in our leadership innovation lab and secured a venture fund to kind of progress their ideas forward. And then from there, we focus on alignment. Now that we had a bunch of in-depth activities, research, how do we kind of center them in the narrative in your application so that it's easy to remember and stand out in the short amount of time that the admissions officers have to review your application? So again, we focused these activities around climate and impact. So founded a climate education platform integrating personal passion and leadership, launched independent research connected to the field, and created the Next Gen Institute and led peer mentorship with a volunteer base. And then we integrated this all together. So kind of when we got to application time, unifying academics, leadership, and service. So talking a little bit more about the students' academic research, through our program, we were able to connect them with Professor Goldstein, who works at the Georgia Institute of Technology. And we kind of did some college level math modeling research on simulating natural selection through differential equations. And kind of looking at the next slide, what we can see is that the student was able to develop a research poster, a final paper presented to academic scholars, and again, has this way now of connecting this interest in climate change and the environment and people and animals into academic research, right? That now they have a professor, hopefully a published paper, all of these things that can make a really big impact. Then outside of research, we also supported the student in their signature project, which was a climate education initiative. So they founded Global Voices, a bilingual platform featuring youth perspectives on international issues, social justice, and climate topics. And they provided editorial mentorship on content strategy and planning. With this project, we helped them establish a publication calendar. They built a peer writer program, developed a themed article series, and we advise them through our Leadership Innovation Lab, which is another program we have to really support those kinds of projects and goals, right? How do you take something from an idea and really make it into something that's impactful? And so by the end, when we think about what the student was able to put on their activities list when they applied to college, right, we could say that they facilitated growth for contributors across more than 20 US states and 3 continents through international collaboration and media outreach, right? Just that wording, I think, sounds so strong and can kind of show an admissions committee your ability to have international impact and move people, which I think is really great. Okay, just a few more slides. We also helped them plan out their summer with a multi-year summer strategy to support his emerging identity as a future policy advocate. So we helped the student with applications to selective programs like the University of Chicago Summer Session and a public policy research program. Again, focused on climate education, connecting this major interest. We helped the student craft strong applications, both highlighting their academic rigor and public impact. And eventually, the student was admitted to UChicago's summer economics program, another key part of their application. The student's FAO said that the UChicago program helped validate the academic foundation behind the student's climate and policy interests, turning impact-driven work into a rigorous college-ready initiative, which I think was so great to see. And then ultimately, to help them with the strategy, we said, okay, well, what is their application persona? The theme of their entire application that everything comes back to. And we wrote that the student's profile combines entrepreneurship, climate action, and technology. Through founding Global Voices, conducting energy research, and participating in top policy programs, he developed a focused narrative at the intersection of sustainability and innovation. And this became an ambitious entrepreneur with a kind heart who uses machine learning and technology to explore climate resilient energy systems for a more sustainable future. And that was everything that we built in the application was around this theme. Does it support this centralized theme? So around this time last year, we were supporting the student with his activities list, making sure that we highlighted things like the community engagement and climate education. And we made sure that the activities were ordered in a way which really aligned to the application persona of a policy-driven change maker. So all of the policy-related things, STEM-related things rose to the top of the application. And we use action-oriented language to highlight the students' leadership, measurable impact on public outreach, and aligning the activities with core interests in environmental justice and economics. From here, we helped with supplemental essays and future plans. Again, really using AI and machine learning to advance climate resilience, ensuring that there was consistent messaging across all parts of the application. Again, it doesn't feel like it's random things. It feels like it's one person that they're learning about. The personal statement was crafted to humanize this very technical student and make sure that it was the why, right? I think there was a lot of awards and research and leadership, but why is this important to you? I think that is what a great personal statement would do and also connects the motivation between concrete action and real world impact, which I think is what admissions officers are always looking for. In the end, the final version of his personal statement talked about his journey from concerned observer to proactive change maker, showing how building a student-led climate education platform transformed his interest into leadership, responsibility, and real-world impact. Ultimately, we guided him to selecting an energy science or environmental science major. Again, just really thinking about this theme that we've been talking about. And we started talking about this student when he first came to us in grade 9. So by the time we supported him with all of these initiatives, he had a weighted 4.49 GPA, so above a 4.0, and was ranked 5th in the class of 500, so top 1%. SAT had hit in that threshold of all of the scores being in a top category, and the student had 7 5s on his AP exams with even more planned to come. By the end, right before we talked about the student liked STEM and did some nice things, by the time he applied, he was the founder and executive director of a climate education nonprofit. He had done a research internship at the University of Chicago summer program. He was the founder and editor-in-chief at the Next Gen Research Institute, was the senator at the Coolidge Foundation, a volunteer tutor, and the co-founder and leader of the chess club, right? This looks so much different than a student who likes STEM and does nice things, right? And again, there's the theme amongst all the things that he was doing. And after all of that work, student was accepted to UPenn, and we were able to see that really great result. So yeah, I hope that was a helpful example just of putting together all the things that I mentioned. Applying early, the student used the early decision binding agreement program, really centralizing your ideas and finding your unique lens or perspective so that you stand out in a really competitive pool of students who are all doing great things.
Thank you, DJ, for sharing all those useful information. I know everyone need to digest that, but before we get into the Q&A section, I just want to share overview of our latest admission results so that everyone can take a look. Yeah, and just a friendly reminder, our host Yuhan launched a poll. If you would like to schedule a free one-on-one consultation with us, please answer it in the Zoom. You can see a pop-up screen. And if you have any question, you can take this time to type your question in the chat box. I see we already have a question. And if you want to share your question, just unmute yourself. You can also do that. So we will just give everyone a few minutes to share the questions. I think DJ can answer the first question in the chat box.
Yeah, so the first question is, they take your position as an early decision or early action applicant into consideration in the case of a deferral, or if there's no differentiation between regular applicants? So I think just to be clear, a deferral, right, means that you applied early and then they put you into the regular pool, right? So I would say that generally, no, at the most selective schools, right? They're going, okay, who is the best from our Massachusetts pool or whatever pool it is, and then going from there. However, I would say at perhaps some of like maybe not the top 10 or 20, some other schools, generally applicants have indicated they really like that school. So there's a chance that you're more likely to enroll, right? Which would make the admissions officer happy. So yes, I think that it would bode well for you in the regular decision round to have applied early, because I think if they were totally torn and they were two exactly the same applicants and one had applied early and been deferred and the other applied regular, they'd probably go with the early applicant. It's a very minor part of the process. Again, I don't think it's hugely influential, especially at the top schools. But yes, I do think that because you've shown them an early interest, I think they're a little bit nicer to you in the process if they can be.
Thank you, DJ. So if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat box, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly. And on the screen, we have some contact information listed here. If you want to reach out after the webinar, feel free to take a screenshot or scan the QR code to book your one-on-one free consultation. Or you can add me by WeChat or email me. Yes. So just give everyone a few more minutes to ask your questions. So while waiting, I just want to give everyone more information about what services we're offering. So we offer families a few different programs based on your needs. So our candidacy building program can start as early as 7th grader for college admission. And as DJ mentioned earlier, we have a research program called Academic Mentorship. It's for 8th to 11th graders, and it allows students to conduct individualized research project with a professor, researcher, or scholar from the top universities. We also have our application counseling program, which is the summer before a student's senior year in high school. If your student is a rising 12th grader, right now they're in the application phase, and the EAD deadline is coming soon. So it is the best time to prepare everything, to finalize everything, to make sure that they are well prepared for their application. And yeah, any questions for DJ? If not, that will be all for today's webinar. And like I mentioned, we will have a recording ready, and I will email the recording to everyone. If you would like to schedule a one-on-one free consultation, feel free to reach out to me or answer the poll so that I can email you after the webinar. If there's no more questions, we will finish the webinar. Thank you all for joining today's session, and also thank you, DJ, for sharing all of this useful information. So we will see you guys next time.
Of course,
Thank
happy to be here.
you.
Hope it was helpful. Have a good evening, everyone.
Hey, bye-bye. Thank you.